All right, here's a fun one. I actually came here to learn some things as I'm gearing up to treat my recently discovered but long-standing yellow algae problem. I did learn some things, such as some more equipment that I had not thought to treat, like hoses and brushes. But for now, a huge criticism of the advice given here. I was following along and agreeing with this volume recommendation. That is, until the pool guy recommended bringing the free chlorine to only 10. 10 is nowhere near high enough to be considered chlorine in volume. Free chlorine up to 10 is actually on the upper end of a traditional recommendation for a weekly preventative shock. Unfortunately, the rest of this response got cut off, but this obviously, we're talking about treating algae in a pool. We're talking about treating hose and brushes, especially with black algae or yellow algae, which with yellow algae you also have to use some type of a yellow algae product. But let's just have a little bit of a discussion then on shocking and levels. And I suppose the advice that it's not one size fits all, and a level of 10 is enough for some people in shocking, but in certain circumstances it would not be.
So in general, a 10 part per million chlorine is a pretty high chlorine. In all cases, no, you're right, it's not. Now, when we used to test water way back in the day, we always made the comment that we brought it to breakpoint chlorination. And breakpoint chlorination was when you had your reagents, like your OTO reagents and stuff, remember back in the day? And breakpoint was the point where when you dropped your OTO drop into your water volume, it no longer mixed, it dropped, it settled directly to the bottom, meaning the chlorine level was so high that it could no longer mix and it dropped, and that was considered breakpoint. Now, depending on all the other factors as to where that is, there's no one point, there's no one size fits all. Breakpoint is absolutely every single time at 15 parts per million. It's going to depend on all of the other factors. Total chlorine, free chlorine, combined chlorine, stabilizer level, pH level, calcium hardness level, alkalinity level, and who knows all of those other things that could actually be in there as well. So this is a science thing. I like to give general guidelines. I am not a guy that's hardcore that's going to say this works every single time, because every pool is different. And I usually use that 10 parts per million is 99% enough. There's the 1% clearly with someone's comment there that they're getting into the chemistry way beyond I would ever get into it. As 34 years in the industry of solving problems, I've never had to get that involved in the chemistry to make it happen. I give general rules. And those rules don't always work. There's no one size fits all. We've had so many scenarios over the years where we have two pools side by side. You would think it's the same city water, so you think it's the exact same, the hoses, everything would appear to be the same, and yet they act very differently. And they can act very differently because, okay, this one was plumbed with copper pipe inside the house. This one was plumbed with galvanized pipe inside the house, because the homes are built 5 years apart and they use different things, and that all affects it. So there is no one size fits all ever. You can try to build two pools exactly the same. One gets more shade than the other, one gets more sun than the other, one gets more use than the other, one has more pets than the other, one has, they might have the same filter heater pump and that, but one has longer plumbing to get to the equipment, one has, you can never, ever make it one size fits all.
When it comes to pool advice, I would avoid taking advice from your brother-in-law whose neighbor has a pool. I would suggest you find sources, but there is often more than one way to solve a problem.
There's always more than one way.
So find some sources that you can trust, and if you have an ongoing problem and it's not being solved any other way, then you should be on the lookout for new advice that you haven't heard before. But as with all advice, if anything sounds a little bit crazy, you probably need to do some investigating, validate it, that type of thing. The other thing is, don't necessarily mix two different methods of advice, because here with Ask the Pool Guy in our videos, you can tell whether I'm answering the question or Al or Mark, we're all giving generally the same information. It might have some nuances, but we're on the same page when it comes to our approach to pools. There are other companies and other methods that would take it in a completely different direction. So you can't try to marry the two. It's like asking directions how to get somewhere and then having two people, one person takes you on the highway, one person takes you on the back roads. You can't combine both of those approaches, if that makes sense.
I have a great quick story that I've never been able to explain why it has happened, but goes to this point. We had a customer, back when we had a retail store, we had a customer come in and they were frazzled. They had tried everything to clear their pool up. Everything they thought was possible. They elevated the chlorine, they used algicide, they used water clarifiers, they did everything, replaced the sand in their filter, made sure the other pump was working right, all of that. And I told him add 8 cases of chlorine to your pool. This guy's jaw hit the ground like 8, think about 8 cases of chlorine to a normal size pool.
That's a lot.
That's massive amount. That's, we're talking skyrocket beyond any numbers that you would have imagined. And the guy followed my advice, and within 2 days the pool was crystal clear. Now, I wouldn't recommend they swim in it for a while, or at that point then neutralize the chlorine, but something in between there that no one has ever been able to describe before as to why that worked versus 10 parts per million, 12 parts per million, all the other things that he did. Instead, it was almost like the pool gave up the ghost. Okay, I'm done. You have your way. And sometimes, and I can't explain why that happens, but sometimes that happens. And you just have to break the normal mold and have someone do something extreme, and then it works.
Well, short of draining and refilling, which could be an option. We did have that happen in one gunite pool, which also surprised me. Mark had to put, I think it was probably even more than 8 cases. It might have been more like 14 in this gunite pool, which I found a little strange because it's a seasonal pool. It would get open and close and new water and all that good stuff, but some chlorine lock happened and it just took extreme amounts to get it to go.
And those are the things that you just can't explain.
Right.
And that's what we don't talk about those because they're rare, but they do happen. And when they do, sometimes you just have to be extreme in terms of how you handle them.
So I hope you get your newly discovered but long-standing yellow algae problem sorted out, and that you add as much chlorine to your pool as you feel necessary.
14 cases of chlorine will definitely take it out of the plumbing.
There you go. Thanks for your comment.